failure as a leader is inevitable. There will come a circumstance or situation that you misjudge, misread, misunderstand, or for whatever reason, make a mistake. I found that failure was an opportunity to learn to trust God in a new way. It was something that you may have thought you had down pat. And that's where, by the way, you tend to get zinged, is when you think you really got that area down pat. That's where the Lord will allow a test or a trial of some kind that will really humble you. And there's great value in that if you receive it that way.
Hey, podcast family, and welcome to episode number 287 of the L3 Leadership Podcast, where we are obsessed with helping you grow to your maximum potential and to maximize the impact of your leadership. My name is Doug Smith, and I am your host, and today's episode is brought to you by my friends at Tongue Advisors. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I hope that you enjoy our content and become a subscriber. And if you've been with us for a while, thanks for being a listener. And just make sure that you're subscribed on whatever app you're listening to this through so you get every episode every week. And also, it would mean the world to me if you'd leave us a rating and review. That helps us grow our audience and reach more leaders, so thank you in advance for that. Well, this week's episode of the podcast is very special to me, as was last week's. Last week, we celebrated the life and legacy of Tunch Ilkin, and this week, we're going to celebrate the life and legacy of another legend in the faith that we lost, Jay Passavant. If you're unfamiliar with Jay was the founder of Northway Christian Community here in Pittsburgh, and the impact of his obedience to God's call in his life to plant that church cannot be understated. He transformed our city here in Pittsburgh, and his impact certainly goes far beyond the walls of just our city. I love what my pastor, John Nuzzo, said at the memorial service. He said that Jay could have easily been a successful elected official or a CEO of a major corporation, and instead he chose to go all in on God's call for him to start and pastor Northway, and that decision literally changed the world for so many people. You know, personally in my life, Jay took time to invest in me as a leader multiple times. He always encouraged me and filled me with vision for what I could do for the kingdom of God, and I'm so grateful for that. And he also deeply impacted my wife Laura's family. They attended Northway for 10 plus years, and my wife was actually baptized in Jay's backyard. So I'm very, very grateful for this man's life and legacy. I'm grateful for the life he lived. I'm grateful for the legacy he's left behind. And I'm also grateful for the example he provided for all of us. In today's episode, you'll hear a throwback conversation that I had with Jay in 2013. We talk about life, leadership, family, and so much more. And I hope it gives you a view into how incredible he really was. I also think you'll gain a lot of wisdom from this episode as well. And just as an FYI, the quality will not be as good as recent episodes. This podcast has come a long way since 2013, but we edited it to make it the best quality that we could. But regardless, you're still going to get so much out of this. But before we get into the episode, just a few announcements. This episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast is sponsored by Tongue Advisors. The financial advisors at Tongue Advisors help educate and empower clients to make informed financial decisions. You can find out how Tongue Advisors can help you develop a customized financial plan for your financial future by visiting their website at beartongueadvisors.com. That's BERATUNG advisors.com. Security and investment products and services offered through Waddell & Reed, Inc., member FINRA and SIPC. Tongue Advisors, Waddell & Reed, and L3 Leadership are separate entities. I also want to thank our sponsor, Henny Jewelers. They're a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny. And my wife, Laura, and I got our engagement rings and our wedding rings at Henny Jewelers and had an incredible experience. Not only do they have great jewelry, but they also invest in people. In fact, every engaged couple that comes to them, they give a book to help them prepare for marriage, and we just love that. So if you're in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. And with all that being said, here's my conversation with Jay Passavant. Thanks, Jay, so much for being willing to do this. I appreciate it. And why don't we start off with you just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Doug, it's great to be able to share with you and your listeners. I'm not sure my life's that remarkable, as much as I feel like by God's own hand, I've been the beneficiary of some very fervent, praying people. And this is a word I'll probably use a number of times in our interview, a legacy that was handed down to me, that to the best of my knowledge was really begun under my great-great-grandfather, William Alfred Passavant. And I have wife, Carol. Been married over 40 years. We have 3 grown kids, all of whom love the Lord and are walking with Him. 2 of whom are married and have little ones. So I have 5 grandkids, which seems impossible, but it's true. And I have lived here in Pittsburgh now. I was born, raised here, left the area for my education, some active duty service time in the Marine Corps as a commissioned officer, and then 3.5 years full-time out of Fuller Seminary, Pasadena, California, where I finished in 1974 with my MDiv and really struggled with wanting to stay in California because of all the action, if you will, that was happening around me I had never experienced before. And the draw to come home, where my roots are, my family was. And at the end of the day, the beauty of Southern California and all of those wonderful other characteristics were not as important to me as being in the location where my family had its roots. I hope that your listeners take note of that. And it's for this reason, Doug, I have had so many conversations with people who've ended up, because they felt like they had to take a job in another city or move away for this or that, which is okay to do, I think, when you're quite young and maybe just starting out. But I don't think it's a great idea if you're in the middle of your most productive years and you have kids that are in school and you found a church that you really love and feel used of God and blessed there. Those are the things that folks often overlook just for the sake of the work position. And sadly, I've had scores and scores of conversations with people who made the choice to leave, not taking into consideration everything they were leaving behind. And you can't get it back. So here I am now out in Denver, but I don't know a soul. I'm beginning over again, they'll say. And they'll find years and years to get reestablished. So, other than the 10 years I described, I've been in Pittsburgh my entire life, and with no regrets other than a day like we had last week where it was minus 12 or 13 degrees in the morning. But fortunately, that's not the norm around here.
Right. That's great. Well, walk us through your leadership journey. Were you born and able to lead something like Northway, or talk about that process?
Okay.
Did you always aspire to be a leader? Did you always feel like you were a leader?
Well, of course, there's varying theories about leadership, Doug, that come from psychologists who really do study it. Are leaders born, rather, or made? And my studied opinion on that now is that there is truth to the conviction that some folks have a natural leadership gift. In the same way, might I add, is I'm not sure how into athletics you are, but you look fit. Look like you could do a lot of different things. But if you're like me, I used to work my tail off to play high school basketball. I played year-round. And when the season started, I was one of the starting forwards for about 2.5 weeks until the football team finished their schedule. And then the really gifted athletic types would step off the field, and I realized that I was just not the naturally born athlete that they were. I think that some of that is true when it comes to leadership. Now, I qualify that because I don't want to discourage any of your people to think that if they don't have that they can't be used, because every person has a sphere of influence, and that's how I define leadership. It's the ability to influence others toward a better objective or goal. Influence to be able to engage someone and move them toward a higher vision or goal. That's what a leader does, is exercises influence. I was a firstborn. Psychologists will tell you this is a science as much as it is a theory, but firstborns, both male and female, by the way, are, for whatever reason, more likely to have leadership gifts than the next sibling down and one after that. Now, quickly again, I want you to hear, this is not a fast rule. So if you happen to be the second in your family, don't think that you're never going to be the leader that you want to be. Not true. but most of the presidents of our nation, for example, were firstborns. Many of the most accomplished people in the sciences, many of the people that have provided leadership in corporations and large institutions, oddly enough, when you peel it back, they're firstborn. And that's somewhat just a function of the natural design of things. And sometimes it gets identified and cultivated early on. Now, for me, I would tell you that early on, I mean, as early, vague, fuzzy as these memories are, when it came time to choose teams, pick up a baseball game in the backyards of some folks in the 1950s, I may have not have been the best baseball player, but I was the one that somehow was able to say, all right, let's stop what we're doing. And people would kind of, all right, you're going to make this happen, so go ahead. And so as early as elementary school age, I was aware, not consciously, because you don't walk around thinking, well, I'm going to be a great leader, right?
Yeah.
But it was just happening. Probably the single most defining event early on that cemented in me that this was going to be part of the calling of my life was in the spring of my junior year in college. My fraternity asked me to run for an office in the student government as a way to show that our fraternity was a very well-run and highly disciplined group. So they have people in student government. Doug, I'd never held an office. I had no interest in politics or whatever, campus or any other kind, to be truthful back then. But under the rather severe pressure of the brothers and so on, I said, well, I'll run for secretary. And they said, no, the only position that really matters is president. So here's a guy with no experience of any kind, no interest in politics of any kind, being told, go out there and run for student body president. And I'll leave out all the details, but by an incredible providential hand of God in my life. This was a totally secular college, by the way. I won the election, and I served as the student body president my senior year at Washington and Lee University, where I attended. And that year turned out to be one of the best years for the university in terms of the perception of the students of the experience of Washington and Lee. And I was awarded, as you can see on the walls in my office here, a number of things from that university. And I can tell you it wasn't because I knew what I was doing as much as I was able to engage others and influence them to a higher vision or goal than they were previously seeking. Yes, I feel like I've had that as an inherent gift from God, but it became incumbent on me to steward that and to use it and to not ever see it as something to be wielded around like, look at me, I'm a big leader, as much as it was, don't take the easy road, take the leader's way, and God will be with you.
That's great. Talk to us about what you do to personally grow and develop as a leader.
Well, yeah, and I would say this is true for people with the natural giftedness and people that maybe just realize that though they're not naturally gifted, they still are put in positions of leadership. It could be as simple as in their own home, but my hunch is almost everybody is aware of their surroundings, knows the people that they can influence. So, with that said, what I feel is incumbent on me to do is to examine my own personal inner life. Am I walking with integrity? In other words, does my walk match my talk? It's the simplest way I can think of saying it. And so I have to examine my heart, and where I find that I've fallen short of what I think would be God's desires, I need to repent of that and get back on track with God, because a leader is only effective to the degree to which he or she is aligned with the purposes of God in their life. Every leader needs to understand that when they exercise leadership or serve in an office of leadership, that they get depleted. It is not a commodity that you can just consume. It's something that needs to be replenished. And one needs to be very intentional about that. So I am at a couple of levels. I voraciously read whatever I can that's on the topic of leadership. By the way, from people that I deem insightful from a secular point of view, Charles Krauthammer, who I think has an incredibly brilliant mind and sees things with amazing perspective. I don't discount him just because he may not share the same faith that I do. But I read rather extensively. Any other online content I subscribe to, to me, Doug, it's important that these be sources that you know of, either personally or have been so confidently recommended by someone you trust, rather than just, well, here's a guy that really seems to have it together, and it turns out that they haven't been vetted very well, and their personal life doesn't match what they're talking about. And we all know stories of people like that. And then finally, I think I would say leadership is cumulative. And the more you exercise it, it's much like weightlifting. The more you exercise it, the stronger you become. So I would say to any aspiring leader, whatever stage they are in their journey, keep using it. And when someone gives you an opportunity to lead, as long as it doesn't interfere with other priorities or in contradiction with your priorities or values, take that opportunity. I did a lot of things that most folks wouldn't know about that weren't directly related to this particular church, but they were important, and they helped me to grow in my leadership and refreshed me in it because I had to engage. So 3 things: personal evaluation and being right with God, reading and pursuing whatever content you can online. And I'm not intentionally leaving out things like podcasts, obviously, because we're involved here in one, or broadcasts. I have several leaders who have video broadcasts that I subscribe to because I think what they have to say on most topics is worthwhile. So content. And then finally, exercise the gift. Exercise the influence that you have. Because as you exercise it, it will grow.
That's good. So you talked about reading, resourcing yourself as much as possible. Maybe can you talk to us maybe about a few of your favorite authors and or your favorite leadership books that you would recommend we take advantage of?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because there is no shortage of leadership books, and you can waste a lot of time just because someone has some sort of catchy title, and then their book really doesn't match up to it. Let me just give you a handful of books that I'd say are just fundamental. And all of these, by the way, are secondary to the Word of God, which exactly the same principle. You cannot live on yesterday's manna or yesterday's revelation or yesterday's words from God. Every day you need to check in with the Lord through the Word. And so I seek to do that. And right up next to that is my devotional companion, Oswald Chambers, that if you're a younger leader, maybe have not heard about him, only lived a short life. I think he died at the age of 26, but published an enormous amount of stuff. And Doug, there's something about his seminal book was My Utmost for His Highest. It's a daily devotional. I can't, there aren't words to describe how God's used that book day to day in my life to help me process decisions, to check my calendar, or character rather, to think in a godly fashion. So right up at near the top. And my copy that was first handed to me was well worn. I had it rebound. I've had the same book for 40 years. And I note in the margins of the book when that particular page spoke to me about a situation. And so what I have basically is a bit of a journal that I've written within the devotional. But there's other books he's done, the collections of Oswald Chambers, so just go to My Utmost for His Highest, I think it is, and a very obscure writer because he started very late in life and did not have much public recognition. A man by the name of Paul Bilheimer. And I stumbled across his writings in 1975, and he had never written a book until he was 75.
Wow.
The book that most impacted me by Mr. Bilheimer was a book called Destined for the Throne. And if you can pick up that book anywhere online and have not read it, that book will affect the way you see life. And it is not a heavy read. I'm not giving you a 500 or 600 page thing, which honestly sometimes is intimidating.
Sure.
It's a relatively compact book, but I have distributed that out to thousands of people over the years because I think it is profound. I think it was God inspired. He also wrote some other books. Don't Waste Your Sorrows, excellent book on suffering and pain and what God plans to do with it. So he'd be right up near the top. Anything written by John Eldridge, sort of the other extreme, less about piety and personal devotion, although clearly he was personally devoted to Jesus, but very, very insightful writer about the essence of relationship and how important it is at every level. Anything by John Eldridge is worth your time. I highly recommend him. I've met John, by the way.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I got a chance to get to know the guy that wrote the books, and he didn't disappoint in that respect either. Then a secular author that it may be Christian or not, but the book is not Christian, is Jim Collins, and his two books, really outstanding. Built to Last is one of them, but the one I most recommend and have used extensively in my personal ministry leadership and through the church is called Good to Great, and I have copies of that.
It's funny. Every single interview I've done with this, every leader's mentioned Good to Great. Every single one. I mean, it's just incredible the impact the book's had. Okay,
and then maybe one final person that writes with great humility, but also this just sort of an unusual sense of authority is Jack Hayford. Jack Hayford from the Foursquare Church out in Southern California called Church on the Way. Anything by Jack Hayford, particularly as it has to do with shepherding, understanding godly submission in leadership, anything to do with worship. This man has penned over 400 worship choruses himself. And I was able to sit under his teaching for a couple of years when I was in California. Again, not a name you'll see that much anymore, but whatever he's done is outstanding.
Wow, that's great. Thanks for the recommendations. I want to talk a little bit about productivity and how you structure your day. I'm sure you have a crazy schedule. You have a lot of things to focus on. So how do you make sure that you accomplish what you actually want to accomplish in the midst of distraction and everything else going on in the world?
Okay, fair question. I think a leader understands that time is a limited quantity that everyone shares. And what you do with it, how you steward that, will affect your productivity. Ideally, in my view, the best way to steward your time is to begin the day alone with God in whatever place you can be. If you happen to be in the middle of a busy household, you might have to just find a little corner somewhere. You may remember the story of Susanna Wesley, father of John Wesley, who had 18 children. And they lived, if I recall correctly, in a rather large one-room home. And when Mama put the apron up over her head, all of the children knew it was time for them to sit down and be quiet because Mama was talking to God. And obviously Mama did a pretty good job if you think of John and Charles Wesley and what they were able to accomplish. Then I have an axiom that I work by, which is to tackle my most difficult issues first. In the prime of the day, when my energies are the highest, when my thinking is most clear and uncluttered by events of the day. And for me, that's usually between 7 and 10 a.m. is when I try to tackle my most difficult or most demanding or pressing issues. By the way, if you do that, it seems like the rest of the day just sort of fills in. Instead of you feeling like, man, that burden, I have to carry it over again. So I highly recommend that. I also very much believe in the value of exercise. So personally, I find time every day to exercise, but 4 times a week aggressively. The other 3 days, really more toward stretching, light, resistance training, and so on. But 4 days a week, I ride outdoor when the weather's nice, road cycling. And if it's not so nice like it's been this winter, I have a very challenging spin bike with a lot of resistance on it when I need to. So I believe in that. I think it helps. It refreshes, and my docs have affirmed this. It just refreshes your entire body. Mentally, you don't even think of it, but even mentally, it's just sort of like a quick wash over, and I highly recommend that. And then everyone needs something to relax. Some people find music, some people go read. I enjoy both of those. I also have a little bit of television that I watch simply because I think you're so passive there that it just isn't what most of life is like, so therefore you sort of enjoy that. And I can afford to do that at this point in my life because my kids are out of the home. I would say if you're a father with kids at home, that's sort of a last resort luxury.
That's good. Related to that, can you just talk to leaders a little bit about balancing ministry and family, or work and family?
Yeah, I'm glad you put that on the list, Doug, because as someone famously said, what good is it if you win the whole world and lose your own family because you neglected them? It's sort of the world's worst kept secret that many of the most rebellious kids that you encounter happen to be the sons and daughters of pastors or preachers, because the dad decided the church was more important than the family. Now, there's a lot of nuances here. I'm sure there's some single parents listening, and they feel right out of the gate that this is virtually impossible for them. But given those caveats, I would say be strategic with your spouse in terms of how you spend the time with the children. In my family, in my situation, my wife was really good at caring for the kids' needs, getting them off to school, that kind of thing. And I made time, and I'm going to use a term here, which may be a book one day. I made an effort to know the times that my kids were what I called in the red zone. You're familiar with that term? Red zone is within the 20-yard line of a football field. That's the place where most every team concentrates on scoring points. If you're in the red zone and walk away with no points, you have failed. And what I began to discover, and this may sound odd, but I'm not afraid to say, my kids responded very well. Even though I was an extremely busy pastor, as when Northway started my home church, I could have been out 14 hours a day, but I made time with the kids on a daily basis to be home for dinner with them, hear how their day was going, and so on. And as they got just a little bit older, Carol did the bulk of the heavy lifting up until about 11 or so. But when they became of junior high age, I made a point of spending individual time with the kids every week. They get the choice of where they wanted to go have a sandwich or whatever. That built our bond, especially in those transitional years, and I can't overstate that. Fathers with daughters, be in your daughter's life from age 10 or 11 through 15, and you will spare yourself and your daughter a world of heartache. It's almost an axiom. It's the absentee parent that ends up with the rebellious kid, and it's their own fault. They just didn't invest. It's not a guarantee. It is not. You could do everything I'm saying, and the child may still choose to do their own thing. But at least you will have gone down knowing that you did your best.
Good.
Let me hasten to say in this, if you are blessed to be married, the most important priority is to see that your spouse is cared for. An illustration of my life would be, my wife Carol knew that every Sunday night, after 4 o'clock on Sunday night, It's an evening and all day Monday, or that was my day and a half off. We set a date night for Sunday night. Interestingly, that may sound a bit canned or corny, but I got to tell you that because it was on my schedule, we're going to do something. We planned for it. So we planned what place we might want to go eat. When we didn't have much money, it was a simple, inexpensive restaurant. If we had more options, we might go into the city. But we would spend that evening together. And here's the curious part. Our kids, rather than whining and arguing and complaining about mommy and daddy leaving, actually welcomed the babysitter and would send us out with things like, have a good time, mom and dad, we'll see you tomorrow, things like that. They began to, here's the key, they found security in our relationship. And by making that visible before them, they felt secure that mom and dad were connecting, and I just think it created a healthy environment in my family, so that none of my kids ever went through a rebellious period with us as parents or with the Lord. All three of them met Christ at whatever age they encountered him and walked with him faithfully, and still do. All of them now being in their mid-30s. I believe it was because of that early investment. Parents, invest now, start now, because as was said to me last night by someone in their 80s, it's interesting how the role of parenting never stops. That is a true statement. You may think when you send them off to college, you may think when they get married, you may think but you know what? You'll always be their parent, and they will always look to you in that role.
That's good. Talk to us a little bit about failure in leadership. Maybe you can share an example of a tough time or two that you went through, but what have you learned about failure over your leadership journey?
Let me begin by saying failure as a leader is inevitable. There will come a circumstance or situation that you misjudge, misread, misunderstand, or for whatever reason, make a mistake. And the consequence of said error or mistake can end up, at the minimum, disappointing people, and at the worst, causing significant loss of some kind, whether it be an opportunity or business or whatever. I found that failure was an opportunity to learn to trust God in a new way. It was something that you may have thought you had down pat. And that's where, by the way, you tend to get zinged, is when you think you really got that area down pat. That's where the Lord will allow a test or a trial of some kind that will really humble you. And there's great value in that if you receive it that way. If you receive it as a teachable moment in your life and not as some sort of disaster that you allowed, there's great benefit to it. And let me give you one illustration. And I think it's common for many people that serve in companies, corporations, certainly in churches and other ministries. In the local church, for example, relationships are of much higher value in terms of sustaining the openness than might be said in a normal manual labor's job or even a normal corporate job. I mean, they're much more siloed in those areas. In the church, we got to live out the first commandment, right? Love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and our neighbor as ourselves. I think back some years ago where I misread and misjudged the characteristics and qualities of a person that I went out of my way to bring on the team. Not to say this was a bad person, but I just misjudged where they were in the development of their skills at that time. And as a result, that led to me making some other bad decisions regarding other staff members, because I had seen this new person taking on more responsibility, so therefore I may not need these other folks. And nobody likes to fire people, least of all me, but I came to a place where I brought folks to a point where I said that there really isn't a place for you at this juncture in our ministry. and they would move on. I came to realize now, in probably 3 or 4 cases, directly related to the one individual I hired, we lost people. And that was a very disappointing time in retrospect. I still keep in touch with those people that left us then, and I let them know. I asked forgiveness, as a matter of fact, because I realized in retrospect that I had misjudged the situation. So, yes, when failure happens, humility is the best calling card. Accept responsibility, both privately and to the people that have been affected. And by the way, the range of your confession and apology should only be as large as the offense. I hope that's clear on its own right. But in other words, you don't need to apologize to your entire corporation if you just made a bad decision that affected 5 people, or in a local church. We don't run around airing out personal relationship issues with the whole church when it's really just 2 people. I hope that's clear.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. And to segue into this question, I don't know if this particular situation caused you a lot of pain, but can you just talk about how you as the leader handle and process pain? I think a lot of times young leaders, as we start to grow in our journey, we realize that leadership can be painful. You do experience pain, emotional pain through different situations. How do you actually process and handle that in your life?
Again, it's an axiom that there will be necessarily seasons of pain that come sometimes through sacrifice. A ministry such as this one does not just happen without substantial sacrifice, some of which is painful, and that you do without some things that perhaps were really desirable and in some cases even necessary in order to accomplish a higher goal. I'm going to give you 3 things I think are important to do. First and foremost is to acknowledge to God that you're feeling this pain. One of my favorite scriptures is in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, where Paul asked repeatedly to be delivered from this thorn in the flesh that commentators can't agree as to what it was. But the Lord said, no, I'm not going to remove it because my grace will be sufficient for you in the midst of it. So when you go through pain, John Wimber was a very well-known pioneer of church growth and moving into spiritual gifts in the 1970s and 80s. John Wimber was the one who taught me about the importance of saying, Lord, I need more grace. In other words, again, it's not a limited quantity. There's literally more grace available. Even to the point where I have some relationships with some few people that I know are going to be contentious or difficult or maybe inconvenient at the least. And I call those relationships EGRs, extra grace required. And that's the way I treat it. I go to the Lord with the pain and say, Lord, I just need more grace to get through this. And I'm not overstating it, Doug, when I say that I can sense when I've tapped into the source of strength, the grace of God. Second thing I would say is absolutely necessary is to find someone to share that failure with. Confession is good for the soul, it says in James. It renews your spirit. Just someone you can unload that burden with and say, look, I'm having a hard time. Would you pray with me? It bonds you with that person, makes you real to them, and also there are times when you're hurting so much that you don't feel like praying, but you know they are. Good thing. And then finally, always know that this pain will end. It is going to come to an end. And that God always, without fail, has a purpose in that pain. And if you ask him to teach you what that purpose was, this is important, you probably won't have to go through it again. So it's good to learn, Lord, why did I go through this? Thank you that it's ending. And that's the essence of how I would handle pain in my life.
I love that. Thank you so much. And in closing, I know you do a lot, but how can we serve you, everyone listening to this? I'll obviously include links to all of your profiles, your blog, etc. But how can we serve you in everything you're doing in the community for the kingdom?
Well, I very much appreciate that offer. It's interesting, and this is meant to encourage all of the folks listening, particularly young leaders. I'm certainly in the later stages of my ministry, but it's awesome for me that my issue today, certainly the last few holes of the course I'm going to run, I still have more to do than I have time for. Productive, meaningful things to do, not just, perfunctory hole punching. I'm talking about very important involvements. So I would request prayer and support from those who might hear this podcast, that God give me wisdom to know where to put the limited amount of time and energy I have remaining, because I have so many opportunities. And maybe we'll talk about those at a future time, but I really need wisdom right now, because these opportunities are seemingly coming up at the same time, and they're a little different. And I have to say, I'm going to go this way and not go the other way. So wisdom would be one. And then second, and I'll be really blunt about this one, because you mentioned pain. I don't know if we've ever talked about the fact that I had major back surgery 18 years ago. I had a spinal fusion done, and now I'm having some ongoing issues with that came on particularly over the last year. So I'd request that folks would pray for the Lord to bring healing, or to, if not deliver me from these things, to at least give me extra grace to be sustained through them physically. Because I will tell you that is a limitation. It limits what I can do. And I would love to be delivered from that.
We will definitely pray for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking time to invest in me and everyone listening to this. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. I'd be happy to do it anytime. Thanks, Doc.
Well, hey, leader, thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Jay Passavant. I hope that it impacted you as much as it did me. And I really hope these past 2 episodes have got you thinking about your life and your legacy and what you're going to leave behind and what kind of life are you living. I'm going to be doing an entire personal lesson next episode on the life and legacy of a leader, and I think it's going to add a ton of value to your life, so look forward to that. If this episode made an impact on your life, I would really encourage you to share it with 5 or 6 other leaders that you think it would add value to. Again, it'll make a difference in their life, and it'll help us reach more leaders, which is our whole goal here at L3 Leadership, so thanks in advance for that. And leaders, as always, I want to challenge you that if you want to 10x your growth this year, I really want you to join or launch an L3 Leadership Mastermind Group. Mastermind groups have been the greatest source of growth in my life over the last 6 years. And if you're unfamiliar with what they are, they're just simply groups of 6 to 12 leaders that meet on a consistent basis for at least 1 year in order to help each other grow, hold each other accountable, achieve goals, and to do life together. So if you're interested in learning more about an L3 Mastermind Group, go to l3leadership.org/masterminds. And as always, I like to end with a quote, and I'll quote Jay Passavant recently. I think this was in one of his last journal entries in his journal, and it said this. It said, "Defeating discouragement. That time, this time, every time. God will not fail me. God will not forget me. God will not forsake me." Leader, I think that's something we need reminded of on a daily basis. Well, I hope this episode encouraged you. And Laura and I love you so much. Thank you for listening. Remember, do not quit and keep leading. The world needs you to lead and lead well. Don't quit and keep making a difference. We'll talk to you next episode.